The Silver Dragon Palace smelled like money and murder. That is the first thing I remember, the way jasmine incense couldn't quite mask the metallic undercurrent of old blood, of debts paid in flesh. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto black marble floors. Everywhere, men in tailored suits moved like shadows with purpose. I was invisible here. Just another waitress with steady hands and downcast eyes. My uniform was pressed sharp as a blade. My braids were coiled beneath a regulation cap. In Lagos I had been Nia Okoye, a woman who commanded boardrooms and knew the weight of kente cloth against her skin. Here, in Seoul's glittering underbelly, I was nothing but a vessel for champagne and silence. But silence is its own language. I learned to read it in the tremor of a guest's hand, in the dart of anxious eyes across crowded rooms. Tonight the silence screamed. The private dining hall held only 7 guests, the Park family and their closest associates. At the head of the table sat Chairman Park Dae-hyun, a man carved from granite and grief. His silver hair was slicked back like armor. His jaw was set against the world. They said he hadn't smiled since his son died. I believed it. Beside him, his 6-year-old grandson, Min-seo, sat with the stillness of a porcelain doll. The boy hadn't spoken in 18 months, not since his mother's car accident. Some called it trauma, others whispered darker curses. I called it survival. My tray trembled slightly as I approached with the second course, braised abalone in delicate lotus broth. The chef, a man named Kwon, had prepared it himself, but as I set the bowl before Min-seo, something caught my watchful eye. A shimmer. Faint, almost imperceptible. It was like dust caught in moonlight, except this dust settled wrong. It floated atop the broth instead of sinking, clinging to the lotus petals with unnatural persistence. Ghost powder. My grandmother warned me about it once in her kitchen in Enugu. She told me how certain poisons left no taste, no smell, only a faint luminescence under the right angle of light. How women in old dynasties murdered rivals with a kiss of white death. My blood turned to ice. The boy lifted his spoon. I moved. The bowl shattered against the marble. Broth splashed across the pristine tablecloth like spilled secrets. Every head turned. Every guard reached for concealed weapons. And in the chaos I stood with Min-seo's small wrist gripped in my trembling hand. The silence that followed was absolute. Chairman Park Dae-hyun rose slowly. His dark eyes were fixed on me with the intensity of a predator recognizing another predator. His voice, when it came, was soft as silk wrapped around a blade. What have you done? I met his gaze, something I was never supposed to do. And in that moment, that single, terrifying moment, I chose to become visible. Your grandson was about to die, Chairman. The soup was poisoned. The room erupted, but the chairman simply smiled. They say that death has a sound. I always thought it was poetic nonsense, the kind of thing my grandmother whispered over palm wine and moonlight. But standing in the palace kitchen, surrounded by stainless steel and trembling men, I finally understood. Death sounds like silence. The chef Kwon knelt on the cold tile floor. His white uniform was immaculate, not a single stain, not a single wrinkle. Only the sweat beading at his temples betrayed the terror coursing through his veins. Chairman Park Dae-hyun stood before him like a monument to patience. I had been escorted here along with the remaining broth, Exhibit A in a trial that needed no lawyers. Guards lined the walls, stone-faced men in black suits who breathed violence the way others breathed air. Min-seo had been whisked away by his nursemaids, silent as ever. His small hand had reached for me as they carried him off. That reach, it haunted me. You prepared this dish yourself, the chairman said. It was not a question. Yes, Chairman, Kwon's voice cracked like dry wood. Every ingredient, every garnish, every addition. Yes, Chairman, I swear on my mother's grave. Then eat it. The words hung in the air like the blade of a guillotine. The chairman gestured toward the remains of the lotus broth, that poisoned mirror of culinary perfection sitting innocently on the counter. One of his men produced a fresh spoon. The chrome caught the fluorescent light. Chairman, please. Kwon's composure shattered completely. I didn't know, someone must have. It wasn't me. I have served this family for 15 years. Eat it. 3 syllables, each one a death sentence. I watched Kwon's hands shake as he lifted the spoon. I watched tears stream down his weathered face. A man who had built his reputation on precision and loyalty, now reduced to this, a trembling creature facing his own creation. He knew what waited in that broth. We all did. The spoon touched his lips. Enough. The chairman's voice sliced through the tension. Kwon collapsed forward, sobbing with relief, with terror, with something that looked dangerously close to madness. The spoon clattered to the floor. Broth splashed against the white tile like watered blood. In that moment, I understood Chairman Park Ji-hyun. He didn't need Kwon to eat. He needed Kwon to believe he would die. The fear was the punishment. The confession was extracted through the anticipation of death rather than death itself. It was cold. It was calculated. It was brilliant. And utterly terrifying. The chairman turned to me. His dark eyes swept over my trembling form like a searchlight seeking prey. I expected dismissal, suspicion, perhaps even accusation. Instead, I saw recognition. You knew, he said softly. Before the first scream, before the chaos, you saw the poison when no one else did. I lifted my chin, a gesture my mother would have recognized, pride in the face of fear. I see everything, Chairman. It's how I survive. His lips curved, not quite a smile, but something far more dangerous. A lioness among sheep, how unexpected. The car moved through Seoul like a knife through silk. I sat in the back seat, hands folded in my lap, eyes fixed on the window. Snow had begun to fall, soft, white flakes that turned the city into something almost gentle, almost forgivable, but I knew better than to trust beauty in a place like this. Chairman Park sat across from me. His silence was heavier than chains. We had left the palace an hour ago. My belongings, a single suitcase containing everything I owned, had been collected by men in black. No explanation, no negotiation, just a quiet command and the understanding that refusal was never an option. Where are we going? I finally asked. The chairman didn't look at me. Somewhere safe. Safe, the word felt foreign, a relic from a life I barely remembered. Safety didn't exist in Seoul's shadows. Safety didn't exist for women like me, widows who carried secrets heavier than gold. The car turned onto a mountain road, trees bowed under the weight of winter's first kiss, and then I saw it. A Hanok mansion, ancient Korean architecture kissing the sky with curved rooftops and wooden beams aged to the color of dark honey. But what stole my breath wasn't the structure itself, it was the decorations within the courtyard. Benin bronzes gleamed under strategically placed lights. Nigerian tapestries hung from the outer pavilion. Their indigo patterns sang songs of home. My homes. You recognize them, the chairman said, watching my reaction with predatory precision. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed around a grief I thought I had buried. These belong to my son, he continued, stepping out of the car. He collected them during his time in Lagos, said they reminded him of someone important. Someone important. Me. The word screamed inside my skull, but I swallowed it down. I forced my expression into careful neutrality. The chairman couldn't know, not yet, not until I understood why I was truly here. Min-seo waited inside, standing in the entrance hall like a small ghost in expensive silk. His eyes, dark and haunted, found mine immediately. And for the first time since I'd arrived in Korea, I saw something flicker behind that hollow gaze. Hope. The chairman placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. The weight of it was both threatening and strangely protective. From this moment forward, you are the boy's Gwigom, his ghost guardian. You will sleep in the room adjoining his. You will taste every meal before it touches his lips. You will become his shadow, his shield, his silent sword. I turned to face him, our eyes meeting in the dim light. And if I refuse? His jaw tightened. Something ancient and wounded flickered across his features. Then whoever wants my grandson dead will eventually succeed. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. And somewhere deep within the mansion, a child who hadn't spoken in 18 months was waiting for a woman he didn't know. A woman who might be his only family left. Min-seo didn't trust me. I saw it in the way he watched me from corners, those dark eyes tracking my movements like a wounded animal observing a potential predator. He hadn't spoken, not once, since I'd arrived at the estate 3 weeks ago. The nursemaids whispered that he'd stopped talking the night his mother died, that his voice had drowned alongside her in that river. But I knew silence wasn't always absence. Sometimes silence was survival. Tonight the snow fell heavier than usual, blanketing the estate in crystalline white. The Ondol heating system kept our rooms warm, but Minseo had been restless for hours, packing his chamber, rearranging his toys with mechanical precision, refusing to sleep. I sat in the adjoining doorway, watching but not intruding. My grandmother had taught me this patience, the art of presence without pressure. In Igbo tradition, we called it IJIK letter 1 ECD letter 1 ECD and letter 1 E5, the joining of spaces, being near without demanding. You can't sleep either, I said softly, not expecting an answer. I understand, my mind gets loud at night too. Minseo paused his packing, one small hand clutching a wooden tiger. I began to hum, an old melody my mother had sung when the Lagos nights grew too hot and my childhood fears too heavy. The Igbo words came naturally, worn smooth by generations of mothers comforting children in the dark. NNE, 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 NWAM, NWAM, the moon holds you close tonight. The lullaby unfolded like silk. Each note carried the smell of palm oil and charcoal, the taste of ojiri in my grandmother's soup, the weight of my mother's arms around me during harmattan season. I sang of home, I sang of safety, I sang of a love that transcended language. Minseo had stopped moving entirely. He stood in the center of the room, the wooden tiger dangling forgotten from his fingers. His eyes, those haunted, hollow eyes, glistened with something that looked terrifyingly close to recognition. My mother. The words came out cracked, rusted from 18 months of silence. My heart seized. She sang to me too. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I simply let the moment exist, fragile as spun glass, precious as uncut diamonds. What did she sing? I whispered. Minseo's lower lip trembled. I don't remember, I can't remember her voice anymore. The grief in those words shattered something inside me. I crossed the room slowly, kneeling before him until we were eye to eye. Then I'll sing for you, every night, until your heart remembers what your mind has forgotten. He didn't hug me, didn't cry, but he took my hand, his small fingers curling around mine with desperate strength. And from the shadows of the hallway, Lady Hae-rin watched. Her manicured nails dug crescents into her palms. Her nephew had spoken for the first time in 18 months. And it was because of her, that African woman, the usurper. The invitation arrived on ivory paper, handwritten in ink the color of dried blood. Dinner tonight, 8 o'clock, private dining room, come alone. The chairman's signature curled at the bottom like a sleeping serpent. I dressed carefully, choosing a deep emerald Aso oak blouse paired with a black silk skirt. Not quite Korean, not entirely Nigerian, something in between like me. My braids were freshly oiled, wrapped in intricate patterns that my mother would have approved of. If I was walking into a lion's den, I would do so looking like a queen. The private dining room was nothing like the palace's grand hall. This was intimate, a low table set for two, surrounded by candlelight and shadows. The smell of doenjang jjigae mingled with something unexpected, suya spice. The fusion was deliberate, a message wrapped in cuisine. Chairman Park waited at the head of the table. His silver hair gleamed in the flickering light. He had exchanged his usual suit for a traditional hanbok, dark grey, elegantly simple. Without the armour of his business attire, he looked almost human. Almost. Sit, he commanded. I obeyed, folding myself onto the silk cushion with practiced grace. You've been here for 4 weeks, he began, pouring soju into 2 small cups. My grandson speaks, eats without being forced, sleeps through the night. You've accomplished what 3 therapists and 2 shamans could not. Children need safety, not ceremonies. I accepted the cup, letting the alcohol burn my throat. Minseo felt invisible, I simply saw him. The chairman's eyes darkened. You speak of invisibility as though you understand it. I do. How? The question hung between us, weighted with implications. I could lie, I should lie, but something about the candlelight, the intimacy, the dangerous softness in his gaze, made truth feel inevitable. Before I was a waitress, I was a consultant, before that a translator. Before that, an economist who graduated top of her class from the University of Lagos. I met his gaze steadily. I became invisible because visibility wasn't surviving, it was starving. Silence stretched between us, then the chairman laughed, low, genuine, unexpected. An economist serving soup to criminals. Life is funny that way. He leaned forward, close enough that I could smell his cologne, sandalwood and something colder. You're not just a waitress, you're not just a guardian, so tell me, Nia Okoye, what are you really? The truth balanced on my tongue, sharp and dangerous. My dead husband's name, my widow's grief, the wedding ring hidden in my luggage. But I swallowed it. I'm whatever keeps that boy alive, Chairman, nothing more. He studied me, that predator's gaze seeing far more than I wanted to reveal. You're lying, he said finally, but it's a beautiful lie, and I find myself curious about the truth beneath it. He raised his cup to dangerous women. My hand trembled as I raised mine, to dangerous men. We drank in silence, the war between us was just beginning. Forbidden rooms always call the loudest. The chairman's private study had remained locked since my arrival, a sealed chamber at the heart of the estate. Guards passed it hourly. Housekeepers avoided its doors. Even Lady Hae-rin's sharp gaze softened to something like fear when she walked by. But tonight the door stood open. Minseo had fallen asleep early. The estate was quiet, blanketed in the particular silence that comes after midnight. I should have walked past, should have returned to my room, should have remembered my place. Instead, I stepped inside. The study smelled of aged paper and forgotten grief. Shelves lined the walls, heavy with leather-bound ledgers and Korean poetry collections. A single desk dominated the center. Its mahogany surface was bare, except for a brass lamp and a framed photograph. I moved closer. My heart pounded against my ribs like a caged bird. The photograph showed a younger chairman. His hair was still dark. His smile was still possible. Beside him stood a handsome young man, mid-20s perhaps, with eyes that crinkled at the corners and a jawline I would recognize anywhere. Because I had traced that jaw in the darkness of a Lagos hotel room. Because I had kissed those smiling lips beneath a canopy of bougainvillea. Because Park Jae-hoon, the chairman's only son, had been my husband. My legs buckled. I caught myself on the desk, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The photograph blurred as tears I'd forbidden myself to shed finally broke through. Jae-hoon, my Jae-hoon, standing beside the father he'd never introduced me to, the family he'd kept secret until the end. With trembling hands, I opened the desk drawer. Inside lay a silk pouch, worn soft from years of handling. My fingers knew what it contained before my eyes confirmed it. Our wedding photographs. Lagos 2018. A rooftop garden overlooking Victoria Island, Jae-hoon in white linen, me in coral aso oak that my mother had woven herself. We were laughing, our rings glinting in the golden light, completely unaware that death was already counting down the days. The photograph shook in my grasp, the chairman knew. The realization crashed over me like a wave. He had placed me in the palace deliberately, brought me to the estate intentionally. Every meal, every conversation, every moment of proximity was calculated, planned. But for what purpose? I wondered when you'd find it. I spun around, the photograph clutched to my chest like armor. Chairman Park Jae-hoon stood in the doorway. His face was carved from shadow and sorrow. He looked older in this light, grief etching lines around eyes that held no surprise, only resignation, only pain. You knew, I whispered, the accusation broke against my teeth. This whole time, you knew who I was. He stepped forward, close enough to touch. I know exactly who you are, Nia. The question is, do you know who killed my son? The silence between us was a living thing. I stood clutching my wedding photograph, my dead husband's smile frozen in time while his father stared at me with eyes that held centuries of grief. The study felt smaller somehow, the walls pressing inward like a confession box. Sit down, the chairman said. It was not a request. I sat, my legs were trembling beneath me. He lowered himself into the opposite chair, the photograph now lying between us like a battlefield. I found you 6 months after Jae-hoon died. His voice was gravel and glass. You had already changed your name, left your apartment, disappeared into the service industry like smoke into fog. For a widow, you seemed remarkably eager to vanish. My throat constricted. I was grieving. Or running. From grief. Or guilt. The accusation landed like a slap, sharp and precise. I felt my Igbo temper rise, that fire my grandmother called the blood of Amazons. You think I killed him? The chairman leaned forward. His gaze dissected me with surgical precision. I think you were the last person to see him alive. I think you received a significant deposit into your account 2 days before his death. I think you fled Nigeria within the week. That deposit was from Jae-hoon, money for our future. A future that conveniently ended with his drowning. It wasn't drowning. The words tore from my throat before I could stop them. The autopsy was wrong. Jae-hoon was terrified of water. He wouldn't have gone near that river willingly. Someone took him there. Someone made it look like an accident. The chairman went still, a predator scenting unexpected prey. And you know this. How? Because I had seen the bruises on his wrists. Because I had found the threatening letters he'd hidden in his suitcase. Because my husband had been running from something far more dangerous than business competitors, something connected to this family and their empire of shadows. But I couldn't say that, not yet. Because I loved him, I said instead. The truth was simple and devastating, and wives know when their husbands are afraid. The chairman studied me for an eternal moment, centuries of suspicion battling against something that looked almost like hope. Finally he exhaled, a sound like crumbling stone. I didn't bring you here to punish you, Nia. Then why? To test you. He rose, moving toward the window where snow continued its endless fall. To see if you were the assassin, or the next target. You saved Minseo's life. An assassin would have let him die. My hands shook. So now what? He turned, his silhouette sharp against the winter darkness. Now we find out who killed my son, who's hunting my grandson. His eyes met mine, filled with something terrifyingly close to partnership. And we destroy them together. A blood debt, a shared enemy, an alliance forged in grief. I should have refused. Instead, I said, together. The war had just begun. Lady Hae-rin found me in the garden pavilion. The snow had paused, leaving the world suspended in crystalline stillness. I had come here to think, to untangle the web of truths and lies that had wrapped around my life, but solitude, it seemed, was a luxury I could no longer afford. You must be very pleased with yourself. Her voice was honey-soaked in arsenic. Lady Hae-rin glided across the frozen stones, her hanbok immaculate, her smile sharp as broken glass. The chairman's sister-in-law had barely acknowledged my existence for weeks. Now her full attention felt like a blade at my throat. I'm not sure what you mean, I replied carefully. Don't you? She stopped before me close enough that I could smell her perfume, orchids and something darker. The mysterious African who saves the air, who makes the mute boy speak, who dines privately with the chairman himself. It's quite the performance. It's not a performance. Everything is a performance, darling. The only question is, what's the price of admission? She circled me slowly, a predator assessing vulnerabilities. I held my ground, refusing to show fear even as my pulse thundered. I know who you are, she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. Jae-hoon's little secret, the wife no one was supposed to find, but you're not as clever as you think. My blood ran cold. How? How do I know? Her laugh was musical and merciless. Because I make it my business to know everything that threatens this family, and you, my dear, are a threat. I'm protecting Minseo. You're protecting yourself. Her eyes glittered with malice. You came here seeking answers about Jae-hoon's death. Let me give you one. She leaned in, her lips nearly brushed my ear. The chairman killed his own son. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stepped back, nearly stumbling on the frozen stones. You're lying. Am I? Her smile widened. Jae-hoon was going to expose the family, going to bring everything crashing down. The chairman couldn't allow that, so he arranged an accident, made sure his rebellious son would never speak again. My mind reeled, the threatening letters, the fear in Jae-hoon's eyes, the way he'd refused to tell me anything about his father's business. I don't believe you. You don't want to believe me, there's a difference. Lady Hae-rin stepped back. Ask yourself, why would the chairman bring you here, to find justice, or to ensure the only witness to his crime stays close enough to control? She turned, her hanbok swirling like silk wings. Think carefully about whose side you're on, Mrs. Park. Not everyone who smiles at you wants you alive. She disappeared into the winter shadows, leaving me alone with doubts that wrapped around my heart like chains. The chairman a killer, or the woman who just left, the true serpent in this garden? I didn't know anymore. The scream woke me at midnight. Min Seo. I was out of bed before my eyes fully opened. My bare feet slapped against cold wooden floors as I ran toward his chamber. The estate was dark, shadows pooling in corners like spilled ink. But I knew these hallways now, every creaking board, every hidden alcove. His door stood open. I burst inside, heart hammering, and found the room empty. The window gaped wide, curtains billowed in the winter wind. Fresh snow was already accumulating on the sill, and beyond it, footprints. I didn't think, I climbed through. The cold bit into my skin like 1,000 needles. My sleeping hanbok offered no protection against the Korean winter. The fabric was immediately soaked through by the knee-deep snow, but I followed those footprints into the darkness. The trail led toward the eastern garden, where ancient pine trees bent under the weight of ice. I ran, lungs burning, tears freezing on my cheeks, until I heard him. Min Seo's whimper, small, terrified. I rounded a stone lantern and froze. A woman in black held the boy. One arm was wrapped around his chest, the other was pressing a knife to his throat. She wore a face mask. Only her eyes were visible, eyes I recognized from 100 past glances in the estate. One of the housekeepers. Let him go, I said. My voice was steady despite the terror clawing at my chest. Stay back, the knife pressed deeper. A thin line of blood bloomed on Min Seo's neck. The boy comes with me, the family wants him, silenced permanently. The family, Lady Hae-rin's smile flashed through my memory. He's just a child. He's an heir, and heirs are liabilities. The woman stepped backward, dragging Min Seo toward the estate's outer wall. The woman promised me enough money to disappear. To start over, I just need to finish this. Min Seo's eyes found mine, filled with the same trust he'd shown the night I sang him to sleep. I had nothing, no weapon, no training, only the blood of queens running through my veins and a promise I'd made to a grieving grandfather. I would not let this boy die. I moved. The woman wasn't expecting an attack. I launched myself forward, grabbing her knife arm with both hands. We tumbled into the snow. Min Seo cried out as he fell free. The blade sliced my palm, burning cold, but I didn't let go. I twisted. I fought. I channeled every ounce of Igbo warrior blood my grandmother had whispered about. The knife clattered into a snowdrift. I pinned the woman down, my bleeding hand pressed against her throat. Who sent you? I demanded. My voice was unrecognizable. Who wants him dead? But before she could answer, shadows moved at the garden's edge. The chairman's guards. They'd heard the commotion. Min Seo ran to me, his small arms wrapping around my waist as I knelt in the bloody snow. Safe for now. Dawn broke over the estate like a wound. I stood on the balcony overlooking the courtyard, my bandaged hand throbbing with each heartbeat. Below, Lady Hae-rin was being escorted to a waiting car, her wrists bound, her face blank with the particular emptiness of someone who had gambled everything and lost. The housekeeper had confessed within hours. The trail led directly to the chairman's sister-in-law. She's been removed from the family registry, the chairman said, materializing beside me with the silence of a ghost. Erased, as though she never existed. And Min Seo. Sleeping, the doctor says he'll recover, physically at least. He paused, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Because of you. We stood in silence, two people shaped by loss, bound by blood neither of us had chosen. The snow had stopped, leaving the world wrapped in pristine white, false innocence, nature's favorite lie. Lady Hae-rin said something, I finally admitted, about Jae-hoon, about his death. The chairman's jaw tightened. She would say anything to poison you against me. She said you killed him. The words hung between us, sharp as the knife that had cut my palm. The chairman turned to face me. His dark eyes were filled with something I hadn't seen before, vulnerability. I failed him, he said quietly. Pushed him away when he needed me, made him feel like he couldn't tell me about you, about the life he was building beyond my empire. His voice cracked. But I didn't kill him, I loved him, imperfectly, insufficiently, but I loved him. I searched his face looking for lies, for manipulation. All I found was grief, a mirror of my own. I believe you. Relief flickered across his features, quickly controlled. The people who murdered my son are still out there, he continued. The threat to Min Seo isn't over, it may never be over, not as long as this family holds power. Then what do we do? He turned to face me fully, the rising sun painting us both in gold. We fight together. His hand reached for mine, careful of the bandages, impossibly gentle. You're not a waitress anymore, Nia. You're not a widow hiding in shadows. You are Min Seo's guardian. You are the keeper of my son's memory. His voice deepened. And if you choose to stay, you will be the matriarch of this house. The weight of his offer settled over me like a crown. Not a wife, not a mistress, something more dangerous, a partner in power, an equal in war. I looked at our joined hands, his weathered, mine wrapped in white. Two strangers bound by blood, loss, and an uncertain future. I'll stay, I said, my voice carrying the strength of every queen who came before me. Not for you, not for the empire, for the boy who learned to speak again. The chairman's lips curved, almost a smile. Then welcome home, matriarch. The sun rose higher, gold and ash intertwining. My throne awaited.